All right, so now I'm recording. Okay. Now, so I'm going to put up the annotations. All right, so here we're going to be dealing with files. Just see, did I say this? Now, this is just the brief introductory part of files. All right, so started off with something called separator. So separator is what determines, so your file path. Your file path, for instance, when you're going to your file path. So if I look at my file explorer here, so you can see there that my separator is, so if I click on here, so Windows 10 tries not to show the separators, but you can display the separators in your own system by simply clicking on up here, and you'll see that it's C /users /nolef /documents /zoom. Now that's just another folder where I save all the videos and then I upload them to the Google Drive. Okay. Now, so the separators for Windows is /. What's the separation for Unix? Does anyone know? /.
I thought it was the same. I thought it was direction. It's the direction of the slashes, which direction you go.
Okay. So I'm not really a Unix man, so I can't comment. So whichever one of you knows more about Unix, it could be our Unix to go to person. All right. Now, with Android, I think Android is / as well, as far as I know. It's not /, I think. Going this way. That way. Okay, so / means it's lying back. Okay, / means it's going forward. Think of a man. Okay, there's our man lying. That's awful drawing. This is our man going forward. Okay, that's where it comes from. / Okay. Now, so now the separation for Windows. Now, if you're doing, so the separation for Windows is /. However, if you're going to do development, I recommend you do not use that guy. You use the / because the / is system independent, which means it works for all systems. And remember, you are coding not just for Windows. More likely than not, you're coding for Android. You could be coding for any one of a wearable device, any connected device. You could be coding for Unix. You could be, now it's difficult enough to do it for Apple, but it could be as also for Apple. Okay? Now, so if you're going to be using files, you're going to be saving them to particular locations, use the / because that means that code will run then on any system. Okay? Right. Now, so then we went to file objects. Now, file objects are not files. File objects are locations of files or locations of directories that may or may not exist. Okay? So, a file is not the location of a file. It can also be the location of a directory that may or may not exist. Okay, that's all it is. It's just an address. Well, it's an address. It's actually not doing anything. Okay, so that doesn't create the file. Okay, that's just an address that may or may not exist. There may or may not be a file there. There may or may not be a directory there. Okay, so if I go to my C drive, now There is no folder called Java test. So if there's no folder called Java test, there's no folder called home. Okay, so that doesn't exist, but that doesn't matter. It may exist. All right, so if you want to find it exists, the command is exists. So my file.exists returns a Boolean. If the file exists, it's going to return true. If it doesn't, it's going to return false. Okay. Now, then I created a folder inside my C drive and I called it test. Okay. I created a folder inside my C drive and I called it test. Okay. So a file object, here's the thing, it can be the location of a file or the location of a directory. Okay. So it's not just the location of a file, it can also be the location of a directory. All right. So c.test does exist. All right. C.test does exist. So this will, I might as well run it. So does this folder exist? True. Okay. I then created a file. I then created a file inside test. And I call this file capital O lowercase e.txt, 1.txt. Okay. So I created a new file object, which is just the location of a file that may or may not exist. So C test 1.txt, I know a file exists at that location. So my file.exist is also going to return true, which is what we have there. Okay, now, up to here, we're using what are called absolute paths. Now, absolute paths are the full address. All right, now the problem with absolute paths, there's a couple of problems. First problem is they can get extremely long. I am in. Okay, now, first problem is they can get extremely long. The second problem is it's a problem that's a little bit more complicated and it's also a lot more serious. All right, if I create a file object and it's going to be in here, right? C users, no left, OneDrive, Java Program 2019, Workspace 2, 8.1, understanding files and directories, okay, and saves a file to that folder. All right, let's say this is an app, and my app saves a file to that directory. All right, if that app is running on another machine, what will happen? Right, I have this whole file path. I have a folder called users. I have a folder called NoLef. I have a folder called OneDrive. I have a folder called Java 2019-2020. I have a folder called Workspace 2. I have a folder called 8.1 understanding files and directories. Unless the other machine has that exact directory structure, your file won't be saved. It's going to generate, you'll get an exception. Okay. Now, we haven't created files yet. When you create files, you have to put them in a try-catch block. Okay. When you do anything with files, you have to put them in a try-catch block. So you try to save a file to that location on another machine, unless the person has that exact directory structure on their machine. Your file won't be saved to that location. Your program will generate a file not found exception. Sorry, input-output exception. IOE exception is the one. Okay? So, absolute paths. One problem is too long, but the main problem is that if I run my application on another machine and I have an absolute path, you have to have the exact same directory structure on the other machine. Okay, you'd have to have something called a C drive. Not all machines have a C drive. Okay, have you a C drive there, for instance? Or is it called X?
Yes.
You do have a C drive. Now, for instance, this thing doesn't have a C drive. Watches don't have a C drive. Any sort of electronic equipment, they don't have something called a C drive. All right, so what's usually used in files is not absolute paths. Now, you can use absolute paths if you know, let's say, it says at the very start, where do you want to install, or you have some code that detects this has been installed on a Windows machine. You have some code that detects this has been installed on an Android machine. Okay? So if it knows that, you can use an absolute path. For instance, with Windows, it's going to install stuff in, is it Program Files or Program Files x86? Let me just say, forget which one it is. Hold on. So if you're storing, if you're installing an app, what happens is it's installed in C Program Files. So you have a bit of code that detects, one of the examples here that's coming, we won't get to it for probably till next week. It's able to detect what operating system you're running. Okay, so if it's Windows, you can tell it to install the application in C Program Files. Okay, that is fine. However, what is used more often than not for saving files is what are called relative paths. Okay, when you're initially installing the application on a machine, you're going to use absolute paths. All right, but any saving of files during your application being worked, so you're using your app, you're generating files. If you want to save them inside the app, okay, you don't want to save them in the system, you want to keep everything enclosed. What you're going to use something called a relative path. And what relative means, now relative means relative to something. Okay, relative means relative to something. So when we say relative path, it's relative to, in this case, the user directory of our application. The user directory of this application is, in my case, C users, no left, OneDrive, Java program in 2019-2020, workspace 2, 8.1, understanding files and directory. That is the user directory. So if I just put in test.txt, okay, the full path of that is actually C users, no left, OneDrive, Java program 2019, workspace 2, understanding files and directories, test.txt, okay, to give it its full absolute path, okay, but this is a relative path. So if I just put in test.txt, now I have test.txt, it's inside this folder, okay, it's inside that folder. Now to show you where it is, so workspace 2. So I'm going to go to here. I'm going to have a look at it. So it's in my, I'm going to go to one by one. It's in my OneDrive. It's in my Java Programmer 2019-2020. It's down here. It's in my workspace 2. And it is understanding files and directory. Let me just see user directory. So just give me a second. I need to see what the user directory is. Right. Now, good morning, Andrew. Okay. Why isn't that appearing there? Test.txt. Hold on a minute now. No, it's created, right? So. Sorry?
We created in under the source file.
No, it's not part of the source. It's sorry?
Yeah, right. Click on the project.
Properties.
Create new file unlimited task.
Yeah, but it is there, right? Let me just refresh it. Yeah. So this. Sorry? Oh, I did, Jeb. So here's the. So, let me just see properties.
Yeah, it was working yesterday.
Yes. I'll copy it and see. Yeah. So. Yeah. So why didn't it appear the other way? I don't know. Anyway, so obviously I had the wrong thing. Okay, so that is our source. That is our user directory. Okay, now, fuck yeah. Now, this is not the place where your Java files are, by the way. Your Java files are inside source, are inside a folder called com, are inside a file called Android. So com.android. Now, when you create packages in Java, best way to look about it is they're not actually folders, but Windows doesn't know how to deal with them. So what Windows does is create folders. All right. Well, packages themselves aren't folders. So what Windows doesn't know how to do with them. Okay. As far as I know, they're recognized in Unix, aren't they? Are they? I don't know. Are packages recognized in Unix? Does anyone know? I think they are, as far as I think they are. Okay, they're not recognized in Windows. So Windows doesn't know what to do with them. So what Windows does is it puts in a folder. Okay, now, so our user directory is here. All right, so everything in relation to that is a relative path, is what it's called. Okay, now we are going to do more with relative paths. So I'm just going to basically cover. Now you can go relative, the parent directory. What do you mean by the parent directory? So relevant to this one, you can go up to workspace, Java programmer, OneDrive, NoLeth, users, C. You can do that, or you can go down the way. So relative to here would be to go into the child directories. Now the parent is the directory it's in. The child is going to be the directory inside the current directory. So a child of the current relative path is going to be that guy, that guy, that guy. All right. So this is the user directory. A parent of this directory would be workspace 2, would be Java Programmer 2020, 2019, 2020. Okay. I have 2 of them. Right, that's what's wrong because I've got 2 of them. Okay. So this is our user directory. Now user directory is F8.1 understanding files and directories. All right. Now, so absolute paths are easier to understand. Relative paths are a small bit more difficult to understand. Okay. So this guy here, this is a relative path. Okay. This is a relative path. Now the way it works is it checks its own user directory first to see does it exist. Okay, and it sees it exists, it checks relative paths first, then it checks absolute paths. That's the way it goes. Okay, so test.txt exists, it's a relative path. Now, so what I'm going to do is I am going to create a file inside source, inside com.android. Now, so that means test is inside this directory. Okay, test is inside this directory. We are going to put in another file and it's going to be in /source /com/android. Okay, that's where it's going to be. All right, now, and it's going to be a relative path. So first of all, I'm going to create the file. I'm going to call the file. So it's going to be a file. And I'm going to call it test2.txt. Okay. All right, so finish. Hi, Kathy.
I know.
Yeah, all right. We'll keep on going, Kathy. Can you hear me, Kathy?
Yes, perfectly, yeah.
That's grand. All right, so Kathy. Now, so now I have the file created in here. Okay, com.android test2.txt. So I want to check, does that exist? Now, I could do the huge long file. It would be all of that, /source /com/android. But we can use relative paths here. Now, it's relative to that path. All right, so we'll put in here. So I am going to go, just put in here. This is relative to our working directory. Okay, so I am going to say my file is equal to new file. And I'm going to say src /com. Now, yeah, it'll be the same with you, /com/android /test2.txt. Okay, now this is a relative path. It's relative to this path. Okay, it's relative to this path. So we're going to check to see, does this file exist? Does this file exist using a relative path? And I'm going to say my file dot exists. The answer is true. Okay, and if we check for something that doesn't exist, so I'm going to copy this. And this is going to be test3, which doesn't exist. So this file, does it exist? Test3. And I'm going to say my file that exists. False. Okay, so you can use relative paths and you can use absolute paths. Now, relative paths are undoubtedly are better. Simple as that. Okay, the only time you'd use absolute paths is if you want to save a file to a particular location on a particular system. All right, that's the only time. So when you're installing your application, you would have to use absolute paths. Okay, in Windows, it's C program files. In Android, I'm not too sure where it's installed, to be honest. All right, but it is just installed in a folder. That's all it is. Okay, so you would have to have absolute paths for Android, for Windows. Now, you're usually going to have different apps for different versions. So you would have a version for Android, you'd have a version for Windows, you'd have a version for Unix, so on and so forth. All right. So the only time really you use absolute paths is if you want to save a file to a particular location. The rest of the time, you're going to be saving it to a relative path. Now, when your app is up and running, it's all packaged up. All right. So if you're saving it to a relative path, it's going to be saved wherever your application is running from. That's where all your files are going to be saved. Does everyone understand that? Yeah?
When you say relative base, like, you mean relative to the source folder? Right?
Yes. No, it's not relative to the source folder.
Is it not because both files are in the
No, it's not the source folder. It is the user directory, which is the one just above the source folder.
Oh, we just can't see it here.
Yeah. Okay. So it's the one just above. So this is mine. So I'll do it again. That is my user directory. Now, when you run your application, packages up and does all sorts of fancy shit. Okay. But the same thing remains. So if you want to save, now you normally save, handiest thing is you'd have a folder created here and you'd save it to a folder inside here. All right. So when you do your application, when it's installed in program files, your folder will be here. Okay. For instance, I'll just go to program files for a minute. So open a new window. All right, so here we have program files. So let's just see some application I have. .NET Common Files, Windows Mail, Unity. Let's try Internet Explorer. Okay, now that is the user directory. All right, that's what user directory is. When you load up your application, that's your user directory. So that's where your files are saved. Now you can have a folder in there to save whatever files you want. So see DEENUS FR images, blah, 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 blah. That is your user directory. Okay, another example. Let's see Scene Builder, which is a Java FX tool. That, again, is your user directory. All right, when you package up your application and you install it, that's your user directory. So that is the equivalent of that. All right, this is your development view. This is your finished product view, but it's the same directory. That's the user directory. Okay, it's the folder that contains all of your files for your application. That's what your user directory is. Okay. Now, so we can see this is a, so what's this one here? This is a relative path. Okay. Now, you can use a combination of paths. Okay, so put in here.
So,
Yeah.
now you're kind of going down from
Yeah.
the directory.
Mhm.
Can you go up the other way? Can you go up?
You can.
You have to do that, Judge.
Yeah, no, I haven't come to that yet. That's not until I think it's the last lesson in this. Okay, but you can.
Right, well, you put the slash the other direction
Huh?
to go back. That's what I was thinking.
No, it's dots.
Right.
Okay. I forget it now, Jason, to be honest, but I think
Yeah.
it's dots. Okay. So what you can have, you can use a combination of absolute paths, absolute and relative paths to create a file object. So So I'm going to create two file paths here. Okay, one is going to be absolute, one is going to be relative. So I'm going to call the absolute one parent is equal to new file. Now you need to get wherever the location is of test.txt is. Okay, and how do you get that quickly? You just go system.getProperty user dir. Okay, that should get you a one you can use. So I am going to use this. So, and it is F in my case. Slightly different than yours, that's fine. So that's the absolute part. Then I go file child is equal to new file, and this is the relative part. So I'm going to go, it's going to be the same as this guy up here. So this guy is absolute path. And this guy here is relative path. Now, so there's a constructor in the file class that takes a file object and a string. There's another constructor in the file class that takes a string and a file object. All right. Now, there is no constructor in the file class that takes two file objects. I'll say that again. I'll actually type it out here. So there is a constructor in the file class that takes a file object and a string. Okay, takes a file object which is the parent and a string which is a relative file path. Okay, or we can have a constructor that takes a string which is the parent and a file object which will be the relative file path. Now, there is no constructor that takes two file objects. Now, I am going to create a new file object. Show what I'm talking about. So file new path is equal to new file. So it takes a file object, which is going to be the parent. Now, parent means the location of the user directory. Okay, it usually means the location of the, in this case, file new path parent. And we're going to put in the second one, which is going to be a string, which is that guy. That should be lowercase p. Now, parent is that. That is a relative path. All right. So I'm going to ask the question, does this file exist? So I'm going to say file location is a combination of a file object and a string, which is a relative path. Okay, so does file exist? I go new path dot exists. Should say true. Yeah. Okay. Now, and if I print off new path, you'll see the full address. Okay. Now, why would you ever use that sort of constructor? Well, there is a method called getParent. Okay. There is a method called getParent. Now, what getParent does is it'll get the parent directory. Okay. Or in this case, it'll get the name of the file that get the name of the folder that houses your application. Okay. So it'll get the name of the folder that houses your application. So I want to find out where my application is installed. So what I do is new path dot get parent. Okay. That's the parent directory. Oh, hold on a minute. Right. That's not correct. All right. So we will ignore that for now because I do more about get parent when I go down. All right. Yeah, we'll come back to that because I have other examples done out below to do with get parent. Okay, the get parent is all about finding the directory where everything is installed. All right, that's what it is. Now,
does that mean it's a copy or a clone, and that's why the parent doesn't exist?
No, no, no. The parent is the folder that contains your file. All right, so quickly cover it. So we have a folder. Oh, fuck yeah. We have a folder called 1. And inside folder 1, we have a folder called A. So the parent of A is 1. The child, so, and we'll say the 1 folder is in C1. Okay, that's where it is. So the address for A is C1 A.
Ah.
Okay, so we can say, so A is a folder. All right, so we can say the parent of A is 1.
Ah.
That's what.
One.
Okay, so it's just the folder that contains your folder. Sorry, yeah. So the parent for your application is usually the path that contains all your application files. Okay. Now, sorry. Yeah, I just done it wrong there, and I've done it wrong there, Igor. The parent folder is actually that guy.
It's at the top, then, is at the chart, is it?
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
so it's not the one that meets you bubbles, it's the kind
Oh,
of.
it's saying it's
Well,
Android.
you set what you set what the parent can be. Okay. Huh? Well, no, you see, because I see our parent here, see users, null drive, OneDrive, Java program, workspace, F8.1, understanding files and directories. That I have set to be my parent file. Or, yeah, my parent file object, which is not a file, it's just a location. Okay. Then I created a new file object by using this constructor. Okay. Now the constructor I used, it takes a file object, which is just a location, and a relative file path. Now the parent of all of those files is that guy. Now get parent only works with file objects that are created by using that constructor. That's what I'm trying to get across. Now I'll go into it in more detail. I've done something I've briefly done something wrong there. Okay, not 100% sure what I've done wrong, because what should be coming up here is C users, no left OneDrive, Java program 2019, workspace 2, F8.1, understanding files and directories. Okay, but
That's the parent of new path.
yeah, yeah, that's the parent of that guy. Okay, but
Doesn't get parent get the parent of new path, the entire path we're creating.
no, all it does is it gets that guy. That's all it does. Okay, I've done something simple, did something wrong, but something simple that I've done wrong. That's the way to describe it. Okay.
So it's not the absolute path. The absolute path, then the parent, then the child.
Well, absolute paths and relative paths, they're just a different way of displaying the same information. It's not that they're different. Absolute path is the full address. A relative path is relative to your user directory. So it's the same thing, it's just a different way of looking at it. It's not that they're different. It's the same thing, but it's a different way of looking at it. All right? It's relative to your user directory. It's relative to wherever you're developing your code. It's relative to wherever you have your application installed. So the user directory when you're developing, for me, is there. When you install it on Windows, your user directory becomes, it's going to be in C program files, and let's say we're developing Scene Builder, that's going to be your user directory. Okay, so if we developed a program called Scene Builder, okay, or if I developed an application called Scene Builder, my user directory would read source com.android source. So my user directory would be C users, no left OneDrive, I'd probably would have an application called Scene Builder. Okay, simple as that. C users no left one drive, Scene Builder. That would be my user directory. Okay, and when I install it on a Windows machine, the user directory becomes C program files Scene Builder. Okay, so if you're using a relative path, it's relative to wherever it's installed. That's why relative paths are undoubtedly better. Okay, now we are going to be creating files. We are going to be creating directories. Now, to make things easier for ourselves, we're going to be creating files exclusively inside the application. Okay, and we're usually going to be creating them inside the user directory. Sometimes we're going to be creating them inside here. That isn't such the best idea in the world, right? You should keep your code files separate from your text files. More often than not, we're going to be creating files inside our user directory, all right? Only in one or two different occasions, we might be saving a file to the C drive, okay? Now, so let me just try this the other way around. So new path is equal to new file. So I'm going to put in the parent, which is that guy. And I'm going to put in the child. Yeah, I got this same problem before.
In there, like, you can put in both parent and child.
No.
Into this parameter, so that works.
No, it doesn't. Because there is no that does that. Okay. Now, change type of parent to string. Okay. So if I change to string, I do that. But yet I get this error, and I don't understand this error. I got this before. The constructor file, string file, is not visible. So I don't know why. I mean, there is a constructor that takes a string and an object. So I don't know why it's not working there. There is a constructor. They even check the Java documentation. All right. So there is a constructor that takes a file object, which is usually the parent, and a string, which is usually the child, which is usually the location, the location of where you want to save files within your application. And there is one that takes a string, which is usually the parent, and an object, which is usually the child. But for some reason or other, now.
You should try with the slash again. That can sometimes be an issue.
You mean slash at the end of here?
String, yeah, you have no slash.
No. So I don't know why that is, because there is a constructor. If you look up the Java documentation, it says there's a documentation. Now, it's not saying there is no constructor. It's saying the constructor file, string file, is not visible. So I'm not too sure why it goes like that, but it is available. So it does exist, but it's neither here nor there. Now, we are going to do various methods of the file class, and we're going to create some files. We're going to create some directories. Okay, so void ex2. So this is various methods of the file class. Okay, so the simplest one is this. What this does, returns a Boolean. True if a file or directory exists at this location, false if not. Okay, so I go file, my file is equal to new file, and test.txt does exist. So this is going to be capital tst.txt. So we go this one. So I go my file dot exists, going to be true. Now I want to check to see does a particular directory exist. All right. So I am going to go to Windows. Now this should exist. So could you just check on your machine that you have a C program files file? Do you have that? Yeah? Not just a C programs files x86.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So that's the address. So that's the address we're going to check. Now we're going to check that to see does that directory exist. All right. So this is my file is equal to new file. I've copied it and I just change it the other way around. So then I go syso my file dot exists. Oops, sorry, hold on. ex2. Okay. So you can, so this is true. And true, this directory exists. So a file, remember, is not a file object in Java is not a file. It's a location of a directory or a file. All right. It's a stupid name for it. Shouldn't be called a file. It should be called address. It's the right thing it should be called because it's not a file, and that leads to an awful lot of confusion.
How much
Right.
space is reserved?
Sorry,
How much space is reserved in the directory for the file?
but it's only a string, Kathy.
Okay. Oh,
That's all it
right.
is. It's just a string. Okay, it's a string that represents an address. That's all it is.
Okay.
So it just takes up the space of a string, whatever a string takes up.
Okay.
Okay, so well, it's a bit bigger than a string because it's got all these methods of it, but it's essentially just a string. All right. So true, this directory exists. Now the next one we're going to use is get name. Okay. So this one is returns name of the file or directory denoted by this path. Now, I actually should change this to what was that? Nothing. File MIDIR. Okay, file MIDIR. So I'll change it to MIDIR. So we've got a directory and we've got a file. All right. Now, so we want get name. Get name does exactly as it says in the tin. It gets the name of the file or the directory that is at this location. Okay. So if I go my file dot get name, test.txt. If I go my dir.getName, gets program files. Okay. Now, next one, get absolute path. Guess what that does? It gets the path. So what does this do? Gets the address path of the file or directory. Okay, looks very simple. My file dot get absolute path and my dir dot get absolute path. Okay, so that gets the full absolute address path of the file and directory. Now, doesn't make a difference whether it's a file or a directory. Doesn't make a difference. Not well here. Yeah, they're both going to act the same. So this doesn't tell you whether it's a file or a directory. If you want to find out, is it a file or is it a directory, we use is file. So returns a Boolean. True if this is a file, false if not. Okay, so we go my file dot is file, my dir dot is file. True and false. Now, if I create, let's say, file dummy is equal to dummy.txt. Okay, that's a relative path. Oops, sorry. Now, it's a relative path. So if it did exist, it'd be here. Doesn't it? It's not there. So if you use is file on this, it's false. Okay, because it doesn't exist. All right, it doesn't exist. You can't tell whether something is a file or a directory if it doesn't exist. So it's going to return false. Okay. Now, as well as is file, we have is directory, which is exactly as it says in the 10. My file dot is directory. So what does this do? Returns a Boolean. True if it is a directory. False if not, or does not exist. Okay, so my file directory should be false. My dir dot is directory should be true. Okay. Now, length. You're doing length of a file. What do you think that means? Bad name, by the way. So there is a method called length.
Size of files.
It's the size of the file. Why they didn't call it size, I don't know. They call it length. Okay, so this one is length. Now, I think the reason they call it is because when we're dealing with files, we deal with something called streams, which do depend on length. So maybe that's why they use length. I don't know. Okay, so what is length? So returns the number of files or the number of bytes in a file or directory, which is important enough because we want to do certain operations. Let's say we have a file of 100 bytes. We want to do something every 10 bytes. So we have to go, we could have a loop or a stream that keeps on going until it gets to the end of the file. So until it gets to while it's less than the length of the file, keep doing something. Okay, it could be a stream or it could be a loop. So if I go my file dot length and we go my dir dot length. Now let me see what size there. So not. Now all that means that it's less than a byte. Now it is possible to get bits, I think. I'm not too sure how to do it, but you can do it. Sorry? No. No, length is because if it was characters. Huh? Oh, well, no, you see, but I think you're going to have one character. So if you have one character, it's going to show up as one byte. Now, I'll check it, Igor, just to be sure. All right. So
You got some text to test there.
yeah, but if I add, that should be 1 byte, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Now, I think technically it's one. What it does now, as far as I know, it is bytes. All right. Now we're going to be using something called, instead of using the length, we're going to be using something called end of file, which is EOF. So we're not going to be using length, but I'll check that, Igor. Is that okay? So it could be characters, but I don't think it is, but I'll check.
In that file that you're going to
Mhm.
back that for a second. Is that just string or is it just order?
Oh, that's a string.
And is it given a byte each character in the string that came up with 4 bytes?
Yeah, so that seems an awful lot.
Or would you just 1 byte?
Yeah, that's counting the characters. That is counting the characters. So yeah, I'll have to check that again now because that's definitely counting the characters because there's no way that's 74 bytes. Not enough. Okay. So yeah, that's definitely counting the characters. So you're right. Yeah, that's definitely counting characters. So
So it is counting characters.
yeah, but I need to check because it said in the book it's bytes. Now we don't actually use that, but still we need to find out. So I'll just mark that. I need to find that out. Okay.
And no points to count for my directory bigger.
Yeah, that's the thing you say. All right.
Because there's only 1 file and
Oh,
should be the same.
no, directory is going to take up more anyway. Right, so I need to check that now.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so as I said, we're not going to be using that anyway. We use something called EOF, and we're going to be using buffered readers and buffered writers, which are much easier to manage. All right. So less modified. Okay, so what this does is returns the number of milliseconds, I think, since the start, since the first of the first 1970. Since the start of the first 1970, which is the current epoch, that's what it is. So all computer numbering systems, year zero, as I said to you before, is 1970. Day zero is the first of the first 1970. The very first millisecond is the millisecond at 12 o'clock. Okay? Now, 12 o'clock is considered the start of the day. You understand that? 12 midnight is considered the start of the day. Yeah? Not after it. All right? Turns the number of milliseconds since the start. So it's midnight on the first of the first 1970, which technically is midnight on the 31st of December. Yes? Yeah? Because the clocks read, when it gets to 12 midnight, the clocks read. It doesn't read 24. It reads right? So midnight is the first, but that's neither here nor there. Huh?
That's you being put into the next
Yeah.
day.
Yeah. But we read that as 5 past 12, 12:05, 12:15, 12:20. That's the 1st of January. Since the start of the current epoch. So return the number of milliseconds. The file or directory was last modified. Okay. So one modified most recently will always be a bigger number. Okay. So I am going to so I've messed around with test. So something in it, I save it, get rid of it, I save it. Okay. So if I go, so my file has been modified more recently than my dir. Yes? So if I go here, oh yeah. So I go my file dot last modified and my dir dot last modified. So my file dot last modified should be greater than my dir last modified. Yes? If I'm talking, I created 2 files an hour ago. Okay? So 60 minutes ago, I created a file. All right, so since midnight, it's 12 hours and 7 seconds. Okay? Now, I created a file at that time. I created a directory at 12:08. Okay? Now, we're taking our baseline to be 1207. Okay, we're taking our baseline to be 1207. Now, I came along and did something with the dir at, let's say, 1230. Now, at 1 o'clock, we check to see which one was last modified. It's going to be that one. So at 1 o'clock, okay, it'll read 30 minutes. Whereas the file will read 53 minutes. Hold on a minute now. I said that wrong, haven't I? Oh yeah, sorry. So we'll say the baseline is 12 o'clock. Okay, so that's the baseline. So the file was created 7 minutes after 12 o'clock. Okay, the directory was created 8 minutes after 12 o'clock. Now we messed around with the directory at 12:30. Okay, so last modified, the directory was last modified 30 minutes ago. The file was last modified 53 minutes ago. No, that's wrong. I said that wrong again. I said it wrong again. Okay. Yeah, here's this. Right. So 7 minutes from our baseline. That guy. Okay. That's when it was created, and we haven't done anything else with it. 8 minutes from a baseline. It's our directory. Now, we mess around with the directory 30 minutes from our baseline. Okay, so that number is greater than that number, which means that is the one that's been last modified. This one has been last modified 30 minutes ago. This one has been last modified 53 minutes ago. Okay, it's the amount of time that's elapsed since 12 o'clock. Okay, this one here, so I'm just going to print it out. So we can see now. Hold on a minute now. Yeah, hold on. So now it's from the first 1970. Okay. Now we can see that my file is this number here. Okay. My dir is this number here. Now my file is a bigger number. Okay. Because that's the one we modified last. We didn't do anything with the directory at all. We just created it. So it's that amount of time since the 1st of the 1st, 1970. That's the amount of time that's lapsed up to the point where we created our directory. That guy there, that's the amount of time that has elapsed up to the point when we last modified our file. That's the amount of milliseconds. Couldn't be nanoseconds because it's a bit too fucking big.
When you modify files in the directory, are you also
Modifying the directory?
No.
No, you're not. Actually,
It's true the other way around.
if you modify a file, you're modifying the directory.
If you modify directory, then
Yep.
all the other files can.
To do, yeah, because your address has changed.
Depends on the domain or.
Hold on now a minute now. So if let me just check that. So now it's C program files. Now you should never do this, but I'm doing it. Okay, I'm going to put a file in. So my dir 972. Okay. Now it hasn't been modified. Now, as soon as I modify test, this number here should change. So it's 3024. You just need to remember those last three numbers. Okay. Actually, I'll copy and paste them here. So there's our two numbers. So that's for the file. That's for the directory. Now, I'm going to do shit to the file. Okay. Now, it's modified. So now I'll run it. Now we get a different number. Yeah, so yeah, it's seeing that the file is modified. Now, I'm not going to change the name of the directory because I'm not going to fuck around with program files. That's one folder in your file you should not fuck around with, all right? What I am going to do is I'm going to create a, now I don't know if it'll even let you put a file in it. Let me just see. Okay, it does. Okay, so I've put a new folder in there called brand new. Now, as far as I know, that doesn't, maybe it does. Let me just see, 972. It does. It does. I just put a folder into it. I put a folder in the directory.
And it changes it.
Yeah. Now, see, so I put a folder. It changes the directory. So modified, right? What I did was, in program files, I put in a folder, and I called the folder new folder.
I mean, it has been modified because it's a different size. Then.
Yeah. So I suppose, yeah. So it has been modified. Now, if I put in a file, so what's the current number? The current number is that number. Sorry? Using what, sir? For what? Oh, that's so it. Oh, yeah. So that's how it knows. Yeah, yeah. So if I come along and I put in a file in it, it should also. So if I put a file inside here, new. It doesn't allow to put my file in program files, which makes sense. Okay. Let me just see. I have an out. If I have a text file outside, can I drag a text file into it? So text. Yeah. Right. So now we'll see. It should also notice a change. So it was 4762. Okay. Now, so if you add in a folder, it says it's modified. But if you have it in a file, it doesn't say it's modified, which is strange.
You still change its size.
You still have changed the size, yeah. Now, maybe the fact that there's nothing in the file. So let's say if I go to the file, because it's less than 1 byte the file is. So let me just see. Program files. I go to what did I call it? Brand new. Thanks, Priya. There it is. Okay, so I'll put something in it. Right. So it's given a size now, and I run it now. No. So that's strange.
But you're not, I kind of got lost in that. You're not changing that to do with my there itself. You're creating a new folder, are you?
No, but you see, last modified only works on a directory that actually exists. My file .last modified only works on a file that actually exists.
Yeah.
If it, right, so if I create, for instance, dummy, I don't know what's going to print out there. Gives you 0 because it doesn't exist. All right. Directory does exist. When I add a new directory, when I add another folder inside there, it detects that it's been modified. If I add a file inside it, it doesn't detect it's been modified. So the answer is, I don't know why it does that. Okay, come in. How are you? Grand. COVID-19 free.
So far.
Huh?
That's that, okay.
Oh, great
Yeah.
stuff. I'll be off for the day, so woo.
Just like that too.
Yeah, grand.
Guys, have you all thought about your work placements?
Yeah, Sylvia, we were talking about that, and what we were discussing was, would it be possible to get 4 weeks doing app development, because they're not going to get 4 weeks. There's no place that's going to take them off 4 weeks.
Well, we were just chatting with Karen there, and she said that she wants to push for them to do work
They
placement.
won't get it. She can put,
Have you tried anywhere?
I've tried myself to get them. No one's going to take them off 4 weeks. No one. I have tried. I have asked a couple of IT companies to go, and they're not interested.
And what about smaller IT companies instead of big
No,
ones?
they'd be even worse, because you know, smaller IT companies, the bigger ones you can have someone to hold your hand, the smaller ones you know one to hold your hand.
Jeez, I hope you have them well trained. I do need to
Yeah.
hold your hands.
Yeah, but no, she can push as much as possible, but it's not going to happen.
Well, look, we'll contact some companies and see what we
You
can
can, yeah.
find out.
Yeah, but I can just tell you now, I've contacted myself.
What
No.
companies did you contact?
HP, Avaya, all the main big ones, and I've tried 1 or 2 smaller ones that are more kind of
Would you
big.
throw me over a list of who you contacted?
Yeah. Well, I just kind of, it was informal, Sylvia, now, so there's nothing formal. They're just people who work there.
Okay,
I did
so you
nothing
didn't
formal.
contact them. Oh, okay.
Nothing formally, it's all informally. Because I find if you contact people informally, they're likely to be more honest.
Okay. Well, you just, whoever it was and you contacted informally, you just, yeah. You just threw them across to me and then I'll
Yeah,
try and
they
say.
probably would prefer not to be contacted by anyone else. They said this to me in quiet. So this is all done unofficially.
Melanie contacted all the HR companies only this week.
Yeah.
For
There was none of them are
roles.
HR. These are all developers mainly.
Okay, right.
So I can't go giving names either.
We'll have to look.
You can have a look yourself. Okay? But just to tell you, that is what's going to happen.
Have you done any career planning with these yet?
No.
Okay, you might maybe start looking at that maybe so that they can do CVs and we can get just for getting that side of it out as well.
Yeah.
Have you all got CVs done? Or some sort of CV?
But most of my CVs, anyone who's their previous course would all have that.
Okay. And have any guys tried companies yourselves or contacts that you might have yourselves for work placement? No.
Months would be unrealistic. They will usually take graduates for 9 months.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But HP, because it takes time to get
I just,
clearance set up.
I can't stress it. For instance, if you look at that there, to even understand that takes 4 weeks, and that's only just 5 or 6 lines. So there's no way, absolutely no way they're going to get 4 weeks. I'm not being difficult now, I think.
But was this not flagged when the course was started?
I told them when the course was started that they're not going to get. I've told Karen and I've told everyone that they're not going to get 4 weeks. And she still seems to push for it, but that's not going to happen. I said, get a larger amount of time, and there was no go. So I'm just telling you, it's not going to happen. There's no use in saying it will happen. It won't happen. And it'd be nearly better that.
And what do companies expect, that people are going to go out on to say that have done this and they're going to go straight into a role?
No, what they expect is that to do 9 month work placement.
Can I just ask you over there, on 9 months workplace, you're not going to get paid. And you're not.
Well, ideally, what would happen is that you get paid the same rate you're getting paid here for the 9 months.
You wouldn't be eligible
Huh?
for it.
So
You wouldn't be eligible. Part of the course would be part of the course.
it would be part of the course.
Oh no, but when this course finishes, if you were to go on 9 months, you wouldn't be eligible for social welfare because you wouldn't be
No.
available for it.
So that's what I mean. Like, I mean,
I was paying job seekers and paying salary. You know,
Because I know a person